In this video, I want to provide an overview of the inquiry design model and its rubric. So in the inquiry lesson plan, which is worth 5% of the course grade, you will use this template to begin a draft of a larger lesson plan that will be finalized in your live text lesson plan. As noted in the other videos, you'll begin with a compelling question. So what is the broader question you're having students try to answer? You'll also notice that you should tie in some standards. So what is a Virginia Social Studies SOL? What is a C3 standard you will use to align? And then what's an interdisciplinary SOL from science, math, or language arts? Please make sure that your SOLs are grade appropriate. They're either from kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, Virginia Studies, or U.S. History 1 or 2. Do not use civics, world geography, or Virginia U.S. history. Next, you'll have a staging the question activity. So how will you introduce the larger lesson to your students? How will you get them interested and engaged in learning about your compelling question? That's where you describe this activity in 1 or 2 sentences. Next, you'll provide 2 supporting questions. In the larger live text lesson plan, as you've noticed in the C3 framework lesson plans, will be using 3 questions. But for this very first draft of a lesson plan, there will only be 2 questions, provide you an opportunity to learn how to design appropriate supporting questions, featured sources, activities, and formative performance tasks. So you'll put your 2 definitionally oriented questions in these 2 boxes. Next, you'll add in your sources right here and right here. List them, give them a title. So for instance, image bank A, image bank B, video A, video B, things like that. And later on, you'll provide the actual links to your sources here, or images of your sources. If you create a source as a Word document, into a Word document, or a handout or something, provide that as an attachment after the sources right here. Next, you'll have an activity that you will use to teach that source. This is an in-class activity. It's not an assessment. It's an actual learning experience students will have that will use the source that you've identified. This could be a discussion, some kind of small group activity, a reading of something. It's up to you to determine what's an appropriate source activity that goes with that source. Next is a way that you're going to formatively assess the supporting question. So you'll have a small assessment right here. This could be, rather than if this was an individual or small group discussion, down here you might have a whole class discussion. If this was a reading activity, if you're reading a children's literature book with students, down here you might have students do a little journaling activity to describe or write out their answer to the supporting question above. The key is that students in this space are answering the supporting question, showing competency and understanding of that supporting question. It is not understanding competency of what does this source say. It may be how does this source best answer this supporting question up here. But this is a formative assessment, a small little assessment in the midst of a lesson for students to show competency and understanding before they move on to the next activity and supporting question. Once students have gone through all of the smaller activities and sources and formative assessments, they get to the end of a lesson or end of a unit, and they will be summatively assessed on their larger understanding. With the summative performance task, you're having students revisit the compelling question up here. So there's 2 different versions of a summative performance task you should be providing. One is a base argument. So you need to have the question laid out right there, but that's not enough. How are they going to argue that question? This could be a discussion, a writing activity, some kind of mini project or drawing, but they need to show a way of understanding and arguing about what their thinking is to the compelling question. Now remember, a good compelling question is open-ended in nature. There is no wrong or right answer. It's all based on how the students use the evidence provided to them to answer that question. You also have an extension activity. What's another way in which a student might, or group of students might, answer the compelling question? So think of an alternative form of assessment. So this argument may be an individual activity, an individual assessment. The extension should be a collaborative assessment, small group or whole class. Or if the argument was small group or whole class, the extension would be individual. And one of the reasons for this is because in the midst of a learning experience, you may think that students have a grasp on what they're learning. But as you get to the third featured source and the third formative task, you get in a sense that individually students understand what the thing is, but collectively they've not had a dialogue or a collective understanding about the compelling question or its supporting questions. So you want to see what they understand collectively rather than individually. Or it could be that students struggled somewhat throughout the experience of these three supporting questions and sources and performance tasks. And so you really want to assess them individually to ensure that every student understands. It could be that you also individually assess all the students and then decide to extend the learning by doing the collaborative assessment. I should also note that these are not continuations of one of the other. So the extension does not build necessarily on top of the argument. They can be completely separate and really should be completely separate assessments. You'll end the lesson plan with a taking informed action activity. So this space is about how students will apply their learning of the compelling question and of supporting questions in a context outside a formal learning experience. So what kind of action can students take in their classroom, in their school, in their community, or in their home? So if the compelling question relates to holidays or traditions, down here, in taking informed action, students can create a new tradition for the classroom. Or if the question is about how we treat the environment, down here you may have students take action in creating a recycling plan for the classroom or for their grade level or for their home. But the taking informed action is about taking action in the local environment, where that environment is the classroom, the school, the community, or home. This is not meant to be controversial or troubling in nature. It's meant to provide students a very real opportunity to apply what they're doing in a social studies setting, to make social studies real and relevant for them. Next, you'll provide 3 different descriptions. An inquiry description. So it says in no more than 2 paragraphs, but it really should be about a half page in length. Provide a description of the inquiry. Be sure to highlight the importance of the inquiry and the amount of time it will take to implement in the classroom. So provide a general overview of the inquiry experience. What's occurring in the lesson plan? Why did you choose these questions? And how much time should this take? Now, when you think about the broader LiveText lesson plan, with the fact that you have to have 3 supporting questions and activities, time-wise, you have to think about this lesson plan as actually a unit worth of time, maybe a week's worth of classroom instruction, because the stage in the question may take about 10 or 15 minutes. Each featured source and source activity is probably going to take you 15, 20 minutes with students. The form of assessment, another 15 or 20 minutes. All again, depending on what it is you're having students do, it could be slightly longer. A summative assessment may end up taking 45 to 50 minutes. A taking informed action may take 1 or 2 days. So if you're adding up time-wise, you're really looking at a mini unit across 1 week of time, across 5 days of classes. You also should address the content. So again, about a half page in length. Provide a description of the content teachers and students must be knowledgeable about in order to enact and learn the inquiry. This is your place to talk about what is the meaning behind and what kinds of things teachers should really research and know about to answer and understand the compelling question and the supporting questions. Where did you find your materials? What should teachers look for as they're trying to extend on developing the lesson? And finally, a reflection. Again, about a half page in length, single spaced. So provide a substantive reflection that considers what you personally learned from the designing a lesson using the inquiry arc model, and considering the following question. How did the experience alter or reinforce your thinking about your current and future practice as an educator? There is no right or wrong answer to this question, just like the compelling question that you're having students answer in the lesson plan. Rather, I'm looking for depth of understanding, insights you're providing, and the quality of that reflection. So I encourage you to have about a half page in length, again, single spaced, and that should be sufficient enough to provide insights, understandings into your thinking about this question. So let me show you the rubric. This rubric is graded on out of 5 points, although you'll notice the target equals 2, acceptable equals 1, and unacceptable equals 0. But how they're calculated is by multiplying by 0.5. So in reality, if you meet the target for each thing, you're getting 1 point. So the compelling question, you provide a compelling question that addresses an issue found in and across the academic discipline that makes up social studies. The question reflects the interest of students and the curriculum and content with which students might have little experience. So a broadly worded question that has students thinking outside of answering a strictly definitional content question. You have appropriate standards, SOL standards, and a C3 standard. Staging the question. You have an appropriate activity that's included that generates student curiosity in the topic. Provides them with initial introduction to the larger problem, and also making personal connections to what students are learning. So the point there where they want to learn more about this question and this problem. You have supporting questions that contribute knowledge and insight to inquiry behind the compelling questions. These questions focus on descriptions, definitions, and processes about which there is general agreement. You have featured sources. These are disciplinary sources that help students build their understandings of the compelling questions and supporting questions, and to practice the work of historians and social scientists. If you do a lesson plan that's grades K through 2, you must have a minimum of 1 source per supporting question. Grades 3 through 6, you must have a minimum of 2 sources per supporting question. So that means if you do a grade K through 2 lesson, in this first lesson plan, you only need to have 2 total sources. If you are doing a grade 3 through 6 lesson plan, for this very first lesson plan, you must have a minimum of 4 sources that students are investigating, 2 for each. As you add a third supporting question, you'll add 1 or 2 more sources. So these sources generate students' curiosity and interest in the topic. They build students' content understanding, and they help students construct and support their arguments related to a compelling question. You also have source activities that make use of the featured sources. They relate specifically to the teaching and learning of the featured source that you have identified. And this is not a formative performance task. The formative performance tasks are assessments designed to help students practice the skills and acquire the content needed to perform well on the summative task. They are built around the supporting questions and are intended to grow in sophistication, meaning they add on to one another, or they contradict or complement one another. If you are trying to provide understanding on something, it may help to have counterintuitive questions or counter questions. So what is this and what is not this? Those provide a depth of understanding for students. You also have summary performance tasks that provide students with the opportunity to construct an argument that addresses the compelling question using specific claims and relevant evidence from sources while acknowledging competing views. It also provides an extension assessment activity that offers students an optional task that can be used in place of the argument performance task. And again, one assessment is individual and the other collaborative. You also have the taking informed action activity, where students represent their ability to understand the issues evident from the inquiry in a larger and recurrent context, assess the relevance and impact of the issues, and to act in ways that allow students to demonstrate agency in a real-world context. And then we have lesson background, which is the general overview of the inquiry lesson and the content that allows insights into your thought processes behind the development and potential enactment of the lesson. And finally, the reflection. So you're providing an in-depth consideration of the question of how did the experience alter or reinforce your thinking about your current and future practice as an educator.